Welcome back to the podcast. I am Dean Seddon, and today I am joined by Steve Radford, somebody I've known for ever, Steve,
Yeah.
it feels like.
A long time, yeah.
We met on LinkedIn maybe, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. I think you came to an event in Birmingham, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
Years ago. And we've known each other for a long time. And you, for a number of years, you pioneered sales apprenticeships. And you were kind of really passionate about getting people into sales. And then you've launched a book. But rather than me try and do an intro, Steve, do you just want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to with Greater Sales right now?
Sure. Okay. So Greater Sales, my business, Greater Sales Company, is about conversational selling. So it's about training salespeople to master conversational selling and help them to hit their targets. It is not exclusively aimed at early career salespeople, but a lot of the people I help tend to be in the early stages of their career. So they tend to be people who've been either thrown in at the deep end and are trying to swim and need a little bit of assistance in that area, or they're teams that are growing rapidly and are struggling with, growing pains. Yeah, but they're all often field sales, not exclusively, but people who work in fast-paced sales environments. So they're having multiple conversations with customers, targeting to close one or two deals a day, that kind of area.
Wow. Okay, so obviously the people watching this will be all different scenarios, different circumstances, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate. What prompted you to write a book about sales?
Okay, so as you said a moment ago, I've been heavily involved in things like sales apprenticeships for quite some time and diploma programs, and they tend to be big programs, have to fit. Yeah, you develop a lot of content to fit quite a complex curriculum. And one of the criticisms of them is they are minimum of a year, huge programs. So I challenged myself to try to do, well, what was it if you do exactly the opposite? What if you wanted to distill everything that people needed to know down as much as possible? And so I challenged myself to get everything into 50,000 words. If I was starting as a new salesperson today, or if I was starting to develop a new team, what do I want them to think, know, and do if I've got no more than 50,000 words or no more than 6 hours with them? So that's where the book came from.
And you would think though, like, sure, I don't want to kind of. What do you think's the hardest bit of sales? Let's just start there. What is the most difficult bit?
I think it's mindset for most people. I think it's getting over selling, what selling is. To me, it's just about helping people. And as soon as people develop that mindset, go in and help someone and find a win-win outcome, something that's good for you and the brand you represent, and something that's good for the customer. Once salespeople get that, everything else comes a lot easier as a result. But for some
What do you?
people, that's the hardest bit.
Yeah, well, it's like I often, I'm not a big kind of fan of cold calling, and a lot of people who probably are on my podcast aren't either. But one of the things that I found really interesting, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is like the fear of contacting a prospect is like huge. Like, and I've had it where like I don't want to interrupt them, I don't want to annoy them, and kind of like projecting what the prospect's doing and thinking. Why are we so afraid of this?
Sales is about interrupting. I think you're right. You're always interrupting. And I think it's, I don't know, in terms of FOMO, well, I have FOFU. I think people can understand them for themselves what that stands for. Yeah, exactly that. I don't know. I think it's a bit of a British thing. I think our American counterparts are not as afraid of interrupting people. But you're right. And it is something that people are afraid of. And the generations coming through who grew up with communication channels where they're often at arm's length from people, DMs, Snapchat, etc. I think that fear is greater in that generation too. Like you, I'm not a big fan of cold calling, but sometimes that's what you got to do, right? You got to pick up the phone, you got to walk in the door and open a conversation.
Yeah, it's an annoying thing because it's like it is the nature of the beast that you have to get people's attention. And I know when I had to cold call, I'll just tell you, I did a cold calling sales job. I don't know whether you know about this.
Don't know, no.
Right. So I was young and I was like, I don't know, 19 or something. And I had to do cold calling. and I would find any excuse to avoid it. Like, and even when I was ringing, I was hoping nobody would answer. And it's like, I'm in the space where I don't want to do this. And yet I'm expecting to somehow magically make this work. And this kind of psychology stuff around sales is just absolutely, it's perfectly understandable and crazy. But if you're in sales, do you think it's just a case of you just have to kind of bash out a load of calls and get over it? Is there a way to get over that fear?
I think there's an element of that. I think we've all had things in life that that frighten us or whatever, and often the way to get through it is just to go do it. I think there are some tricks with cold calling that help. I think comes back to that helpful piece. If I want to walk in cold to a prospect or pick up a phone cold to a prospect, I kind of want to know two things. I want to know an idea of how I could help them. It's just an idea at this stage. I might not know much about them, but therefore I'm ringing, I'm contacting, I'm walking the door with that intent in mind. And the other thing I want to know is what's a question that I could ask about them that I'm genuinely intrigued about? Because that's, you want to open a conversation. And I think those are two things for me. If you've got those two things in your mind, it breaks a bit of barriers down. As soon as you get talking, things start to flow a bit naturally. But you just have to. That's why I love coaching people like field salespeople. Because literally on day 2, day 3, let's go out, let's go visit some customers, let's go walk in some doors. By the time you've walked into 20 doors, that fear starts to subside a bit. What's the worst they can say? You're not asking them to marry you. They can say no, and there's another customer next door.
Do you know what I used to do? This is telling you another thing I used to do, but I've done, and this is somebody who hates sales, right? I've had to knock doors and sell. And that is, I don't know which is worse actually, cold calling or knocking doors. But you're right. I think if you do it enough, you do get used to it. And the scary thing of, what might happen, I can't recall right now, from all the cold calling I did, and I did a lot, I can't recall one really bad life scarring experience. I can't remember any of them. And the only experience I remember on the door is, I don't know whether you remember, like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this trend of wearing, it's all back now, wearing really baggy jeans and hoodies. So I had these baggy jeans and you basically the back of the jeans would trail along the floor and it would all be ripped. Do you know?
Yeah,
And it'd
I
be
know the
wet
ones you
through.
mean.
Yeah. So I was knocking the doors with these baggy jeans on. I had a hoodie on because it was raining a bit. And I knocked on the door and somebody opened it and they just went, "No, we don't give to the homeless on the door," and slammed the door on me. That is the only memory I've got of doing that kind of really direct sales. And I know none of us want to do it, but I don't think I regret doing it now.
No, it's
Like,
it builds a resilience, and you gain those stories, don't you? I think so. Not too long back, we're only talking 4 or 5 years ago. There was a brand I was working with, and their sales director was out with one of their team. So he's 2 tiers above the field sales team. And he took the team member into a customer and got thrown out. Wrong customer, wrong day, with an axe to grind, who literally escorted them off the premises. And I think that was great for a number of reasons. One, it just shows you that, it doesn't matter who you are, how high up in the chain you are, these things are going to happen. And two, it just became a story that I think broke the ice with the whole team. Well, if the sales director got thrown out of a call, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Yeah.
and obviously the other big thing I think, it was a big challenge for me, is discovery calls. Oh my God, they were terrifying. Like, I understand the models, I understood the models like spin and all this kind of stuff, but actually trying to do that in a call, like think about what I'm supposed to be doing on the call and listen to the customer and think about how do I put it all together. I found that really difficult for a long time and I had to resist my urge to want them to buy my thing. How do you manage your like self in those calls where you've got what they're saying, where I need this to go, kind of thing?
I think you're right. Sometimes you get these models like spin, and spin is not a particularly complicated model. but that's all you focus on. You ask a question and then you stop listening because you're too busy focusing on, well, what's the next stage I need to go into the model? Where do I need to go next? So I think it's about sometimes simplifying it down. So I have a simple questioning funnel, which is you start off broad subjects, and as the conversation goes on, you narrow the subject down towards a direction you think is going to be helpful for both of you to go. So that's one methodology. Keep stuff simple. If you struggle to remember, a process like spin, then simplify it down further. The other one is sometimes it helps just to have a mental question bank of go-to questions you like to ask, not a script, nothing that someone else has given you. But if you know I've got a question I can fall back on, or 4 or 5 of those types of questions, it stops you worrying about what to ask next. Because if the conversation seems to stall, or if you get into a dead end, and you can't think of how to take that point forward, you can then pivot to one of those your
Yeah.
question banks. Yeah.
And for those who might be like really at the beginning of their sales journey or have to sell themselves, the eagerness is to like, they've come on a call, they want to hear about what I've got to offer. I'll just tell them about what I do. Why is that a mistake?
Okay, because you're making it all about you, and it's not. The sales conversation should be all about the customer, where they are now and where you can help them to get to. But it's not something that just new salespeople do. I see experienced salespeople do it all the time, especially if they're excited about something they've done a lot of prep, they've got a really clear idea how they can help a customer, they've got something new they want to talk about. The number of experienced salespeople you see go straight from the engagement step, skip understanding, which is what I tend to prefer to use to discovery, straight to present, and you find you're talking at a customer. So it takes practice, and you've also got to realize that even experienced salespeople get it wrong. The key to me is if you're going to start explaining to a customer what it is that you can do to help them or where it is that you'd like to help them get to, and you can't use words that the customer has said to you earlier in that conversation or another conversation, then you're doing it too soon. You should be paraphrasing words back to the customer. The reason I'm going to tell you this is because you said this earlier in the conversation. And that is for me, a good sense check. Have I heard
How do
something I
you,
can say back? Yeah.
in that kind of discussion where you're trying to kind of find out what's going on with them and so you can then tailor what you're going to say next. How do you know when you've got to the nub of the issue? Like, how do you know when you've got to this is actually where we can help? How do you like not just touch the surface?
Yeah, I think it's looking at the impact. And for B2B salespeople, who are lots of the salespeople I coach and train, are B2B salespeople, they'll focus on typically the profitability, whether that be a cost saving, but there's always an emotional element to it too. And sometimes it's about digging into that. It's about stopping to go, okay, I understand how I can help this customer to achieve their business goals. Maybe I just want to just dig into a little bit more. Okay, what happens if we don't hit them? Why is this important to you and your role? What are your KPIs? What can I do as part of this that might help you as an individual rather than just you as an organization? And I think when you start to then get to those elements, why is it personally important to that individual as well as important to their business? That helps you get past that, that surface nature and level that one level deeper, I suppose. Yeah.
And if here's another question. In your book, you talk about like what are you selling or what you're selling.
Yes.
I'll tell you a story. I was working with a company where they have a lot of kind of SDRs, so very, very junior people. And I was just doing LinkedIn training. So just the usual stuff I would do for how to find your prospects, how to engage them. And I said this thing of like, and you said it before, when you're like, before you approach a customer, you've kind of got an idea in your mind of what you could sell to them. And I said to this person, I said, we picked one of their prospects off their sales navigator. And I said, so what do you think you're going to sell to them and why do they want it? And he said, I don't know until I've spoke to them. And I was like, yeah, but you've got an idea, right? And it was like blank at me. And I think there's two parts to that kind of knowing what you're selling. There's the having the idea of like, can I understand their business a little bit, even from the outside, like a little bit of research to go, well, this is probably not relevant for them. I'm not shutting the door, but it's probably not. But it might be this because they're in retail, or they're this, or they're that, or the other. There's that bit of knowing what you're selling, but there's also the bigger issue of they're not buying what you're selling either. They're buying something else. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Because I think we get too obsessed with what we want to sell rather than what they want to buy.
Yes. So first, I talk about suspects and leads, and I separate the two. So suspects for me, there's a big pool of people who you suspect you can help, and I think that example you just gave, they're a suspect. Lead is there's something specific about that customer that leads me to believe I could probably help, and that's your your pre-research. So if you're out in the field or whatever, we don't walk in the door until you've got an idea of, okay, there's a leading indicator here somewhere. So we've got an idea, but even if you've got a very good idea, A, it might just be an assumption, and B, you've always got to give the customer a way to take the conversation the way they want to go. But in terms of what you're selling, it's breaking that down. And I do training with people about features, advantages, and benefits, but you're always selling an idea. That's the key thing. You're selling an idea, first off, that person's got to give you some of their time, because as we said earlier, you're always interrupting people. And you're also selling, a change state. The idea you sell means they've got to do something differently after the sales conversation or as a result of the sales conversation that they did before. It might just be believe something different that means you can get the meeting into the diary that you want. So I think it's rolling back from what you're selling, features, advantages, benefits, whatever. Okay, first thing we've got to do is we've got to sell an idea. We've got to get this customer to buy into the idea of just giving us some of their time.
Yeah. It's really interesting that, because I like on LinkedIn, like I see a lot of outreach messages and I go, what the hell are you doing? Because it's like, we're amazing. We've worked with these people. We do this stuff, worth a call. And it's like, no. And yeah, it's just, I don't know why we're just obsessed. Like, I want to sell my thing, and that kind of trips us up.
And I think one of the reasons it trips us up is that you hear a lot of marketing messages, because unless you're talking to an individual, you're probably marketing, not selling. So if you're broadcasting through any channel, so it's difficult to get to those benefits, and you tend to find a lot of marketing starts feature led, so it's what we're hearing all the time. And so I think it's the natural default. And when you go on, product training or whatever, most product training centers around features. So these are what we're hearing all the time. So yeah, it takes practice and effort to get past that.
I think as well, like you're right there about like, I always like to think about sales as, or marketing as one to many and sales as one to one. And I think one of the things I'm grumpy about at the moment is if you look at the rise of, I love automation, I love AI, so don't think I'm one of those Luddites. But it is actually a lot of what is being done as sales right now is actually marketing. It's just I'm sending the same marketing message out to lots of people and hopefully somebody bites. Um, And you're right on the marketing front, because if you think about the marketing journey, you've got people who are unaware, and you've got a set of marketing messages to get people who are unaware of their problem. You've got a set of marketing messages for people who are kind of problem aware, and there's different types of messaging there. And then you've got actually the solution aware, where it's very benefits and features and stuff like that. And if you think about how we consume ads, we see an awareness ad which tells us about something, and then we end up seeing, and that gets translated into sales outreach, which is just shocking.
Yes.
I mean, literally, I could go through my LinkedIn with you right now and go, oh my God, random strangers inviting me to things and not really explaining what they do. And it's like, there's a really cool GPT prompt. I don't know whether we talked about it on Tuesday. It's like, I didn't like sharing it, but it's like, my audience is selfish. They will only give me their time if they see a direct benefit for them. And it's like, that is true. If you want more calls with prospects, they are not just going to fairly evaluate what we do and go, maybe it's worth my time unless they see a direct benefit to them. And I think we just lose that.
Yeah, and it is difficult because, like you say, until you get, I'm with you. Marketing is one to many, selling is typically one to one. And whilst you can get really clever with your ICPs and really niche them down and narrow them down, so you're talking to a very small number of people who are hopefully very similar, it is still one to many. You are still hoping that that message lands, and somebody sees it and goes, "Yeah, that's me." It's difficult, and there's a real skill in it, and it's becoming easier. And I'm like you, I massively embrace AI. I think there's definite places for it in the sales cycle. I also think there's definitely places to avoid it. And it helps, and it helps you to miss those blind spots because, something I learned from you, Dean, is using AI to help you understand what do I miss? What are the blind spots I miss when I'm talking to my ideal clients? Because we've all got them. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I found with AI though? Is I'm now asking too many questions. Like I'm over analyzing to the point where, like, I've created a buyer persona on ChatGPT to understand my buyer, and I'm going, yeah, but what I don't know, like, I'm all for research. I'm all for like digging in and understanding your persona, but there's nothing like talking to him to actually either confirm, support, or say that was junk. And I think as much as I love AI, as much as I love buyer personas, there's an instinct you develop when you've talked to enough of the same type of customer, like same market, same roles. That like there's an instinct, and that can be really powerful in sales because then it's like you have to watch you don't jump ahead of yourself. But when you jump on a call with a certain persona, you kind of already know that this is probably a thing and this is probably a thing. I always say to people on LinkedIn, try and go after the same persona all at once because you'll get really good at understanding that persona.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. And you've always got to test those assumptions because, people are not all alike. But yeah, and this is that piece of the ROI piece about there is definitely a return to be made from, upfront planning, preparation, research, etc. But there's a limit. Sometimes you'll invest so much into that the return you get out won't be worth it. Sometimes just make the calls, just go and visit the customers, ask the questions, and learn live.
There's a I don't know where I'd love to say I made this up, and it's all mine, but I think I heard it somewhere else. Of sales and marketing is the only industry where a 95% failure rate is not bad.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
guess
I
you.
know it's not all failure either. That's to be fair. Let's just be honest. I mean, some things like I've had marketing that I think was ineffective and didn't achieve anything. And then, like 3 to 6 months later, they come back and say, oh, we saw this, or I did get your email. That's the other one. Like some people have come back to me after I've outreached them 6 months later and go, sorry, it's took me a while. And I'm like, I even forgot who you were.
Yeah, yeah,
So there is this kind of like, okay, the visible, immediate return on investment from sales is obviously quite the visible, tangible is quite low as as a percentage, not 80% success by any means. But there is still that kind of, yeah, can we be 5.5%? Like, I think we sometimes think it's a numbers game. And it is a numbers game because you have to talk to enough people to actually get good at it. You have to talk to enough people to figure out and get a result. But I think people think it like that numbers game thing for me bothers me because often it gives you license to basically say, I'll just spray and pray. And I think it's a skilled numbers game.
yeah. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. We were talking about snipers versus machine gunners, and he was using machine gunners in a way that was different to the way I looked at it. You want to be yeah, you get a sniper, you're gonna have a high value, one particular target, and big deals. You put a lot of effort in. But there's also like the shotgunner. It's a case of yeah, you want to be a really narrow focus, and yes, in that area. You do need to put a lot of shots on target because not all of those are going to be effective, but you've got to narrow it down. I like the phrase sales is a contact sport, and that works both on an individual prospect level, and that's probably the way I look at it, rather than a you've got to
Yeah,
have rather than a spray and pray approach. Yeah,
I got I've got I might inadvertently promote something that I don't want to promote now, but I got a message from somebody and it said, we can couple you up to this email marketing service with 20 different email services and then send out across the day, I think it was 2,000 outreach emails across these 20 accounts every day. And then they said, then in the same message, they said, and you'll book 4 to 5 quality calls a week. And I'm like, Jesus, you're sending that many. That's a different kind of numbers game. That's like lottery numbers.
And how many of those have you just burnt? Yeah, that's the problem. There is not an infinite number of customers out there, and customers do remember. I mean, I remember just like you. I'm sure you do. When you have a particularly bad sales outreach from someone, and then they come round again a couple of months later, you go, "Ah, I remember the last time. Yeah, it's still a no."
Yeah. I've got one at the moment, and I think this leads to the trust conversation you've got in the book, that I get a lot of outreach now with very ridiculous promises. So I got one the other day about social media at paid ads. Not really something that I'm adept in these days. I used to do it a lot. And it was, if we don't get you to 300K of monthly new business within 90 days, you don't pay. And I'm like, you're promising £300,000 worth of new business to complete strangers. Now I get it. They're sending it out and some people will bite on that. But I just think the promises and that erosion of trust from that kind of machine gun outreach means we're we're much more skeptical of everything that salespeople say because we get so much junk.
Yeah. Although I think it's that point. Is it that we get more skeptical of what salespeople say? Is it, or we just get more skeptical of the marketing noise? And that's where I think that, just like you, I believe AI, great tool, has a fan. There is definitely a lot of places for it in the salesperson's conversation. But I think what's going to happen in the long term, or even in the medium term, is people are going to start prioritizing those in-person conversations, those live conversations. They'll be difficult to get, but when you get them, that's the way you're going to get sales across the line, because people are going to get fed up of AI noise.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's how do you get a feel of what the company's like? I say this in workshops myself, more LinkedIn, but I say, let's be real about this, right? If you've got a great brand as a business, but you don't get a gel or a connection or trust with the salesperson, there's no deal. Right? There's no deal. It doesn't matter how good your brand is. It's whether that person, I trust the seller in front of me. Do they come across as genuine? Do they come across as somebody who actually wants to help, or are they just there to make money? Am I just the next commission check kind of thing?
Yeah.
And you can kind of pick up on that. I mean, obviously, every salesperson wants a bonus and a commission check, and they're motivated to some degree by making money. How do you build that trust and not come across as that salesperson?
I'll loop back. Excuse me. I'll loop back to that, but I'm going to tell you a story first about why it's so important. One of my early businesses, I had a field sales agency, so we would employ and manage field sales teams on behalf of brands. And we'd often be dealing with procurement teams. So these are teams they're trained to try and take the emotion out of the buying process. And we got ourselves involved in a reverse auction. And this was the point I knew it was time to get out of that business, which was essentially they narrowed us down to, I think, 5 different suppliers. And then there was an online platform at which you put your prices in. It told you where you were in the pecking order, and it was a reverse auction. We closed the auction. We weren't the cheapest, but they bought from us. They came back and ordered us the contract. And when I asked, okay, later on, why? And the answer was, because you felt like people we could work with. You weren't the cheapest supplier. And so even in that procurement control process, they'd recognise that actually there was a trust in who we were, and potentially maybe trust that we weren't going to nail our price to the floor. So I think in terms of generating that trust. You have a phrase which I love, which is people buy from people they know, like, and trust. Those three things are connected. You build trust by helping people to get to know you and, helping them to like you, making yourself, likable and in the way that you would deal with people. And trust to me is always linked to risk or perceived risk from the customer. Sometimes you don't need a lot of trust because if the risk from their side to go with buy into what you're proposing isn't high, then trust isn't as important. But if they have it's a really high perceived risk, and it might be due to cost, or it might be due to the fact that if they buy from you, they've got to end the relationship with another supplier. I think you've got to recognize that balance. And where there is a really high degree of risk, you've got to go and earn that trust as part of the sales process. So it's a recognition piece as much as anything else, but it's always important.
And coming to the AI piece, you mentioned it there for a minute, but how do you reckon AI is going to change sales? And the reason I ask you this is there's obviously all this about sales agents and all this kind of stuff. Where do you think the place is for if somebody's building their career in sales? Where's the bit that makes them AI proof?
I think there's a number of places, but it is about reading and responding to the customer that's in front of you and adding value through every conversation or touch point you had with that customer as much as you can. And obviously there's a personalized element to that too. Because if you're not adding value, salespeople are expensive, right? If you're not adding value and if there's a cheaper way for the organization to achieve the outcome, they're going to take that cheaper route. I think it's about being adaptable. I think it's about having a growth mindset. I think it's about embracing the tools that are in front of you and not saying, no, I'm not touching AI because that's not right for us. So I think, the world is changing incredibly quickly at the moment, and the salespeople that are going to get left behind are those that don't change.
Yeah, if you're plugging a load of emails into a tool and just dealing with the replies.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're an SDR spouting the same pitch to every customer, well, get an AI agent to do that. How are you personalizing it? How are you adding a bit of your own personality into the process? How are you making it enjoyable for the customer as well as, all the other things you want to get out of it? Do the things that AI find difficult.
If you're doing exactly what AI can do and there's no human element to it,
Yep.
they
Yep.
don't need. I mean, I've said for a long time, if you think about the classic model, you've got a sales SDR and then an AE. If all the SDR is doing is pummeling out pitches, they could just automate that and plug it into the AE.
Yeah. Yeah. And I heard something the other day about someone forecasting that SDRs would disappear as a result. Yeah, bad SDRs will. Those that essentially have they're so highly automated, they might as well be an AI bot now. Yeah.
I think though it comes from a lot of a lot of companies hire what is an SDR, and they're basically kids out of uni, aren't they? A lot of companies, it's kids out of uni, and by the time they've done that SDR job, they might just know about what sales is by the time they've done their 2 years or whatever. In one sense, you have to be a good, I don't know what the word is, psychiatrist, psychology student to be in sales. It's a kind of like, maybe it's rewarded more in America, but in the UK, it's like when you're in sales, it's like a good job for people who didn't go to uni kind of thing. And maybe that's a bit derogatory, but do you know what I mean? It's like it's not seen the same way as it is in the US.
No, not at all. So, as you know, as you mentioned earlier, so I did a lot of work with the sales apprenticeship program, and the program I developed is a level 4, which is equivalent to year 1 of university. There are now level 6s and a level 7 in sales, but the numbers are still really small. But in the UK, you're talking low thousands of people a year. In the US, there are 26,000 people a year who graduate with a sales major or minor. 26,000 people a year. And I don't think it's just a numbers game that they're a bigger market than us. They've embraced it. They don't see it as a dirty word. And we're still trying to get over that in the UK. We are moving, but it's slow.
It's like, and I think as well, the sales skill now, like if you think about it, it used to be your interpersonal skills, your conversational skills, and and that's really important. But there's now digital conversational skills. There's, you got to write emails, and it's a way more complicated sales now than it was. Whereas before it was just you'd network, you'd meet people, and if you were what do they call? If you're an extrovert, a good people person, you'd do well in sales. Now you have to be good time managers, good admin, good everything.
Yeah, so my lad has gone off to university, but I said to him if he wasn't sure what he wanted to go and do, or even if he leaves university and he hasn't got something, he wants to go and do as a career, a year in sales is so valuable because it teaches you so many skills. As you said, how many salespeople now are doing jobs that were in the realm of marketing just years ago? It's just been added to their skill set. You need to do this now. There's so much to learn.
And coming back to that conversational piece, what do you think the hardest part of getting that into conversational? Like, I always think about when somebody says conversational, I feel about it in two ways. And maybe, well, no, before I say my piece, you say your piece. How would you define, for people who are going, well, sales is sales, what separates conversational sales from whatever perceived notions they might have of what a salesperson does?
Okay, so I have a definition of sales is about helping customers to make informed buying decisions by exploring and targeting win-win outcomes. And there's loads in that, but the exploring is a great example of how actually, yes, you might have, we talked earlier about the fact you've got a leading indicator of how you think you might help this customer, but go and explore it. And that conversation might go in a direction that's difficult to what you expected. Target an outcome that's a win-win. It's got to be good for you. It's got to be good for the customer, and go and help them to make a decision. There's so much in that, but it's that, for me, it's that exploration piece. It's that having a model, having a framework. I think that gives people confidence that they've got a process to go through, but it's not predetermined. That customer has to be an equal part of that conversation. And for me, that's what I love about sales conversations. They often go in tangents that you didn't expect. And sometimes they're better than you expected, and sometimes they're worse than you expected, and sometimes they're just different. But that willingness to explore and adapt the conversation to the customer that's in front of you is absolutely key.
Okay, so let's just do a kind of quick fire round of some of your experiences. What was the hardest thing that you struggled with in sales when you started in sales?
I used to hate sales. I saw salespeople as becoming increasingly irrelevant and sales as a transaction or, not an experience, certainly not a nice one. The thing that changed me was something we mentioned earlier, is that the recognition that sales is about helping people. That was the hardest thing for me to get over. I just had this mental block that salespeople manipulated people.
Yeah, it's a common one.
It is common.
Okay, biggest sales mistake.
Ooh, okay. I've got a few. Assumptions. Always assumptions. I think there's a number of times we were pitching some really big high value deals. So, £1 million plus deals when I had an agency. And I remember one in particular, we thought we'd got it in the bag. It was a client we'd worked with before and didn't put the effort in. So yeah, so it's always an assumption, I think.
Okay. Biggest win.
When I sold my agency, that's the biggest sale I've ever made. I sold my agency to a bigger.
Okay. And what's the funniest, most hilarious sales story you've ever been told or you've observed?
Okay. The funniest that I can repeat on here as well, which is
Yeah.
makes it slightly challenging. Okay. I know a managing director of a reasonable sized business who went out with a customer and got so blind drunk that neither one of them remembers what happened later on in the evening. And I think both thinks the other party have got something over that they got up to something that they shouldn't have done. And I've heard that story from two angles, from the managing director and from his customer independently. No one really knows what went on that evening, and I think everybody, including them, would love to. So yeah.
Not talk about it.
Yeah.
I tell you, one of the first sales I ever made, and I was working for another company, and it was a big retail store. And they spent about like I must have been like 22, 23, and I was selling like 400 or 500 quid sales. And I did a big quote for this company, and it was like 1,500 quid. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get this sale. I'd love to get this sale. Right. And I was like on it, like when you got a big deal and you're just on it, you're watching it, you're refreshing. Anyway, they came in and they ordered it, and they said, and can we have the same order next week? And I went, what? And it was just like, my face just, when you like, and it turned out they ordered that same order basically for about 9 months every week. And I was like, and I'd love to say it was my superior sales skills or anything, but it was just like I'd landed on one customer, I'd put a quote together, and I hadn't connected how big they were. And I was like,
which is probably a good thing because you'd have probably discounted a lot deeper had you done that.
yeah. And the thing was, it was so sad because every time I went out with the family, I went, oh, there's their shop. Oh, there's their shop. Everywhere I went, it was like, there's their shop. I used to walk in it like I was some kind of owner of the shop because it just felt so good that they were my customer.
My wife hates going to supermarkets with me because I work with so many FMCG brands. I've always got, while I'm here, I need to go and check out, and I'll disappear for 10 minutes to go and have a look at all the brands that I've been involved with to see what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And the annoying bit is most of those brands will not allow you to use them as testimonials or case studies.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I've got this, like, literally, that's the most frustrating bit. As soon as you get a really good testimonial, you go, can we use it? And they go, oh, yeah, it's got to go to legal. Like, oh, I might as well forget this even happening. And I've got one testimonial, and it's like, it's brilliant, right? And the guy who was in it said, I have to get it run past legal for you to be able to use it. So I was like, oh, okay, we'll never see this again. Anyway, he came back. He said, there's only one small amend. At the front of the video, can you put the views expressed in this and not blah, 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 blah. Like,
Yeah, brilliant. Just what you want at the start of your testimonial. Yeah.
it's so frustrating that though about like when you get those really good stories, particularly with the big corporates, and they're so like antsy about their logos and stuff like that. But I have found, and I don't know whether you just want to, before we wrap up, I think there is something about once you get onto a role with a particular industry, like there's this thing, isn't there? Like, I don't know what it is, like, we'll go a bit woo woo for a minute, where if you get a deal with one particular industry, you can almost go on a run. And I've never seen this. And why do you think it happens that you can go on this kind of like you're on a roll? You can go like really kind of dry, barren, and then you hit one, and it's like 10 of them.
I think it comes back to this thing like of trust, doesn't it? It's like there was the old phrase, no one ever got fired from buying from IBM. And there's one of those in every industry. And if once you start to be seen as the specialist in that space, people become less afraid of making that decision because, you were the known expert in that area. And hopefully good news spreads and people move from one business to another. I get a lot of business through referrals. And often it's the case is because someone I've trained is now somewhere else to the extent that one of the best things that's happened to me in the last few months is I got a contact reach out to me on LinkedIn who was an apprentice and who's now just become a sales director at a decent sized global firm and said to me that he loved the fact that in his first sales meeting with his team, he used something that I used with him in his first apprenticeship workshop that I delivered. So it's that, it's you get known and over time, yeah, you build a little mini brand in a little niche.
Yeah, yeah. So strange how it works that you just get really attuned really quickly. If you really double down on something, you can really understand their world. And I think that's what sales is really, isn't it? It's understanding each individual person, their business, and then recommending what might fit. And I think we just do overthink it.
We do. And it's that piece I came back to earlier about people like to buy from people they know, like, and trust. And we like people who are like us. And sometimes that's just the words you use, the phraseology you use. as you said, you start to probably pick up on some nuances that are really industry specific. And when you start to use them, even if they don't recognize it, they just start to think, yeah, this guy gets me. Yeah, they understand us, our business, our sector, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So final thing I keep saying final thing before we wrap up, but what's the one big sales tip you would give people as we're wrapping up 2025? What's the one big sales tip you would give anybody who's going, I need to get better at sales?
Find better ways to help your customers and treat them as individuals. I think that's the core of everything that you do. And it's that first piece. There's always a way to do it better. You just got to go find it.
No, that's brilliant. Steve, I'm going to ask if you can share a link wherever people were watching or listening to your book, because it's awesome. I wrote an acknowledgement for it because it's that good.
Thank you.
So grab the book wherever you're listening and go find Steve on LinkedIn as well. And if your team need any support and you want to get them up in their game and hitting more of their targets, Steve's the man to talk to. Steve, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Dean.